Chapter 1. The Last Shift. The petrol pump stood isolated on the edge of the town, a relic of a time when the road was busier. Now it was a forgotten place, surrounded by dense woods and a silence that seemed to swallow sound. The girl, named Eliza, worked there alone most nights. She was a quiet soul, with a past she rarely spoke of, and the job suited her just fine. The monotony of the pump, the occasional customer, and the hum of the fluorescent lights were all she needed. It was a chilly autumn evening when Eliza finished her shift. The clock struck midnight, and she locked up the small kiosk, her breath visible in the cold air. She glanced at the old rusted sign that creaked in the wind. "Welcome to Hollow's End Petrol Pump." The name always gave her a shiver, though she couldn't say why. As she walked to her car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, she noticed something unusual. The woods seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to her tiredness, and got into her car. The engine sputtered to life, and she drove off, leaving the petrol pump behind. Chapter 2. The Road Less Traveled. Eliza took the usual route home, a narrow road that wound through the woods. The trees loomed on either side, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to her. She turned on the radio, but all she got was static. Annoyed, she turned it off and focused on the road. After a few minutes, she noticed something strange. The road seemed different. The trees were denser, the road narrower. She frowned, gripping the steering wheel tighter. She had driven this route countless times, but now it felt unfamiliar. Then she saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding. The car skidded to a halt, and she looked up, expecting to see someone hurt or in need of help. But the road was empty. Eliza sat there for a moment, her hands trembling. She glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing. She took a deep breath and drove on, trying to shake off the unease. Chapter 3. The House in the Woods. The road seemed to go on forever, and Eliza began to feel a growing sense of dread. She checked her phone, but there was no signal. The woods were closing in around her, and she felt like she was being watched. Then she saw a light in the distance. Relief washed over her as she drove toward it, hoping it was a house where she could ask for directions. As she got closer, she saw that it was an old, dilapidated house, its windows dark and its roof sagging. The light she had seen was coming from a single flickering bulb on the porch. Eliza hesitated, but she had no other options. She parked her car and got out, the cold air biting at her skin. She approached the house cautiously, her footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The door creaked open before she could knock, and a voice called out from inside. "Come in, dear. You must be cold." Eliza stepped inside, her heart racing. The interior of the house was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. An old woman sat in a rocking chair by the fireplace, her eyes fixed on Eliza. "Thank you," Eliza said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I got lost on the road, and The old woman interrupted her. "You shouldn't have come here, child. This is a place of darkness." Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" The old woman leaned forward, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "This house, this road, they are cursed. Those who enter never leave." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "I need to get home. Please, can you help me?" The old woman shook her head slowly. "There is no help for you now. The road has claimed you." Chapter 4. The Whispering Pump. Eliza backed away from the old woman, her mind racing. She turned and ran out of the house, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She got into her car and drove off, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. But the road seemed endless. No matter how far she drove, she couldn't find her way out of the woods. The trees loomed over her, their branches clawing at the sky. The road twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the darkness. Then she saw it, the petrol pump. It was the same one she had left hours ago, but it looked different now. The lights were dim, the sign hanging crookedly. The kiosk was dark, the windows shattered. Eliza stopped the car and got out, her heart pounding. She approached the kiosk, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The interior was a mess, the shelves overturned, the floor littered with debris. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and something else, something foul. Then she heard it, a whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She turned, her eyes scanning the room, but there was no one there. The whisper came again, louder this time. It was a voice, but it was distorted, like it was coming from far away. Eliza felt a cold hand grip her heart as she realized what it was saying. "Welcome back, Eliza." Chapter 5. The Curse of Hollow's End. Eliza stumbled back, her mind reeling. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with its eerie sound. She turned and ran, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. The kiosk was no longer the same. The walls were closing in, the air growing colder. The whisper became a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, their words overlapping in a cacophony of sound. Eliza fell to her knees, her hands over her ears, but the voices were inside her head, echoing in her mind. She screamed, but no sound came out. Then she saw them. The figures. They were shadows, shapeless and formless, but she could feel their presence. They surrounded her, their voices growing louder, more menacing. "You shouldn't have come back," they whispered. "This is your fate." Eliza's vision blurred, and she felt herself being pulled into the darkness. The last thing she saw was the flickering light of the petrol pump. And then there was nothing. Chapter 6. The Endless Road. Eliza woke up in her car, the engine running, the headlights illuminating the road ahead. She was back on the road, the woods stretching out on either side. She felt disoriented, her mind foggy, but she knew one thing. She had to get out of there. She drove on, the road twisting and turning, but no matter how far she went, she couldn't find her way out. The trees seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker. Then she saw the house again, the light flickering on the porch. She stopped the car, her hands trembling. She knew she shouldn't go in, but she had no other choice. The old woman was waiting for her, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You can't escape, child," she said. "The road has claimed you." Eliza felt a cold hand grip her heart as she realized the truth. She was trapped, caught in an endless loop of darkness and despair. Chapter 7. The Final Shift. Eliza woke up at the petrol pump, the clock striking midnight. She was back at the beginning, her shift just ending. She felt a sense of déjà vu, but she couldn't remember why. She locked up the kiosk and walked to her car, the cold air biting at her skin. She glanced at the old, rusted sign, and a shiver ran down her spine. As she drove off, she noticed something unusual. The woods seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to her tiredness, and drove on. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was trapped, caught in an endless cycle of darkness and despair. The road had claimed her, and there was no escape. Chapter 8. The Whispering Pump. Eliza's story became a legend in the town, a cautionary tale for those who dared to venture into the woods. The petrol pump was abandoned, left to decay. But some say that on quiet nights you can still hear the whispers. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear Eliza's voice calling out for help, trapped in the endless loop of the cursed road. And if you're foolish enough to stop at the petrol pump, you might just find yourself caught in the same darkness, your fate sealed by the whispering pump.